I am Joshua. I am 28 years old. And my own mother told me that the greatest gift I could give my brother for his wedding was to vanish from the family forever. Before I tell you how a multimillion-dollar CEO showed up in the middle of that catastrophic wedding and changed my life with a single sentence, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's good to know you're out there. The sound of chaos is a strange thing. From the quiet of my car in the far corner of the parking lot, it was a muffled symphony of disaster. I could imagine the discordant notes echoing through the grand hall, the confused chatter of 100 well-dressed guests, the shrill, panicked questions from the bridesmaids, and above it all, the booming, furious voice of my brother Matthew. It was the sound of a perfectly orchestrated world coming completely, beautifully undone. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the venue I had so carefully selected months ago. It was warm on my skin, a stark contrast to the core of ice that had formed in my chest. Inside that magnificent building, a wedding was supposed to be happening. His wedding. The wedding I had planned down to the very last napkin ring. The wedding I had paid for with my own sweat and savings. The wedding I had just single-handedly obliterated. I leaned my head back against the worn fabric of the driver's seat and closed my eyes. I pictured the grand ballroom. It should have been filled with the rich scent of roasted prime rib and expensive white floral arrangements. But right now it would be stark, echoing, and entirely empty. The tables, which I had mapped out with military precision just 48 hours ago, would be bare wood. No fine linens, no gleaming silverware, no custom centerpieces. The string quartet I had booked would be at home, their instruments silent in their cases. The caterers would be packing up their unused ingredients, probably eating the appetizers themselves. My phone, lying on the passenger seat, was having a seizure. It buzzed and vibrated relentlessly against the leather. The screen lit up in a frantic, predictable cycle. Dad, Matthew, Aunt Margaret, Matthew again, Mom. A barrage of text messages flashed across the locked screen. Where are you? The doors are locked. Call me right now. You are ruining this. It was a desperate digital scream for the person they had banished just last night. The fixer, the problem solver, the family janitor. But that person was no longer available. I could see them so clearly in my mind. My mother, Eleanor. Her face a mask of horrified disbelief. Her precious social standing crumbling with every passing second in front of the town's elite. My father, Robert, pale and useless, wringing his hands as he always did whenever a crisis demanded actual leadership. And Matthew, my golden boy brother, his handsome face, usually so smug and self-assured, would be contorted into a mask of pure, impotent rage. His massive future salary as a hotshot lawyer couldn't buy him a single chair to sit on in that empty room. I felt a brief pang of sympathy for Lauren, the bride. She was collateral damage in a family war she hadn't even known was being fought. But the truth was, my family wanted me to vanish. It was a simple request, delivered with the casual cruelty of a death sentence over dessert. So I did. I vanished, and I took their perfect day with me, pulling it down into the abyss right alongside me. My hand turned the key in the ignition. The old engine coughed, then settled into a familiar, comforting rumble. I put the car in gear. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing left for me back there. As I pulled out of the parking lot and onto the open highway, the frantic buzzing of my phone faded into the background. For the first time in 28 years, I wasn't driving toward a problem I had to solve. I was driving away from one. How did a sacrifice of my own hard-earned money turn into an empty ballroom? To understand why a younger brother would ruthlessly dismantle his own flesh and blood's wedding, you have to go back. You have to understand what it was like growing up in my house, where love was heavily taxed, and my brother always held the winning ticket. There were two sons in our house, Matthew, the golden child, and me, the other one. Matthew was born with a spotlight attached to him. He was the charming one, the witty quarterback, the one who looked perfect in the family Christmas photo. I was the one who made sure the camera had batteries and the lights were plugged in. From as early as I can remember, our roles were carved in stone. When Matthew's brand new bicycle got a flat tire, he threw a tantrum on the front lawn. I was the 10-year-old who spent a Saturday afternoon in the garage with my dad's rusty tools, patching the rubber tube until my knuckles bled and my hands were stained black with grease. Matthew was too busy complaining to the neighborhood kids about the great injustice that had befallen him. When I finally brought the fixed bike out, he grabbed the handlebars and rode off without a single word of thanks. My father just clapped me on the back and smiled. "Good job, Joshua. You're a practical one." It was meant as a compliment, but it felt like a brand burned into my skin. Matthew was the star. I was the stagehand. This dynamic only intensified as we got older. While Matthew was out setting local sports records and eventually heading off to an expensive law school to chase his dreams, I discovered a passion for how things worked. Not just bicycle tires, but systems. Specifically, the teetering, chaotic system of our family's business, Ellis Groceries. My father ran that store with his heart, but absolutely not with his head. He trusted the wrong people, ordered too much perishable stock, and ignored the accounting. By the time I was 16, I was unofficially balancing the books at the kitchen table late at night. I created the weekly staff schedules, negotiated minor disputes with delivery drivers, and figured out why our produce was spoiling faster than the competitor down the street. I kept the boat afloat while my parents cheered for Matthew from the deck. Fast forward a few years. I had moved out, barely making rent, but I managed to build a respectable life for myself as a freelance marketing strategist. I found a niche helping struggling small businesses find their footing. I was good at it. I could look at a failing bakery and tell them exactly how to rebrand and get customers through the door. Then came the opportunity of a lifetime. Vance Corporation, a massive national retail chain, needed a regional marketing director. The contract was for a staggering amount, a salary that to me back then was a fortune. It meant stability. It meant proving my worth. I beat out dozens of highly qualified applicants. I sailed through 3 rounds of grueling interviews. I even sat down with the CEO himself, Charles Vance. He was a terrifyingly sharp man who saw right through corporate nonsense. We talked for an hour. He shook my hand and looked me dead in the eye. "We'll be in touch very soon, Joshua. I like the way your mind works." I walked out of that skyscraper feeling 10 feet tall. My life was finally starting. 2 days later, the email offering me the final contract arrived. My hands were shaking with pure joy as I typed my reply. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. "Joshua, you have to come home." Her voice was a thin, greedy thread of panic. It was the voice she used when the basement flooded or the taxes were due. "Mom, what's wrong? Is Dad okay?" I asked. "He's fine, but the store, it's a disaster," she cried. "The suppliers are threatening to cut us off. We took out a second mortgage to cover payroll last month. We're drowning. We're gonna lose the store, Joshua. Your father's legacy, everything. It's all going to be gone." My stomach plummeted. I asked about Matthew. "He's going to be a lawyer," I argued, my voice tight. "Can't he look at the contracts? Can't he negotiate a payment plan?" "Oh, you know Matthew," she dismissed instantly, a hint of annoyance in her tone. "He's building his career. He can't get bogged down in this mess. It would distract him from his finals. This is your area, Joshua. You always know how to make things work." There it was, my function, my sole purpose in their lives. I looked at the Vance Corporation offer on my computer screen, the shimmering promise of my future and my independence. Then I looked at the phone in my hand. My friend David's voice echoed in my head, warning me to let them fail, telling me they only saw me as a utility. But I couldn't do it. I pictured my father losing his pride, standing in front of a boarded-up store. With a heart feeling like a block of lead, I sat down and composed the hardest email of my life. I withdrew my name from consideration due to a severe family emergency. I clicked send and watched my dream evaporate into the digital ether. I packed up my small apartment and went back home. I spent the next 2 years working grueling 60-hour weeks at Ellis Groceries. I treated the rescue of that store like a military campaign. I slept on a cot in the back office. I met with suppliers like Mr. Henderson, a notoriously tough old bird who supplied our fresh produce. I didn't beg him for more time. I laid out a clear, aggressive business plan back to solvency. I showed him projected margins and a revamped marketing strategy. He looked at my papers, looked at me, grunted, and said, "Your old man should have handed you the reins 10 years ago. You've got a deal, son. But I'm trusting you, not him." I rebranded the store. I fired lazy employees my dad had kept around out of pity. I ran local ad campaigns. Within 18 months, we paid off all supplier debts. By the end of the second year, the store was more profitable than it had ever been. We were in the black. I had done it. I saved my family from financial ruin. I thought, surely now they would see me. They would respect me. The night of my supposed triumph was a celebratory family dinner. My father bought a prime roast. He stood up at the head of the table, raised a glass of expensive wine, and smiled a wide, proud grin. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it, the moment of recognition. As you all know, the last couple of years have been incredibly hard. My father announced, his voice thick with emotion. But the store is thriving again, and it's time to secure its future. That's why Eleanor and I have decided to officially hand over the management and ownership of Ellis Groceries to Matthew. The air rushed from my lungs. The wine glass in my hand felt suddenly heavy. I stared at him, sure I had misheard. I looked around. My mother was beaming with pride. Aunt Margaret was clapping her hands softly. And Matthew, who had barely set foot in the store in 2 years, looked like a king accepting his rightful crown. "What?" I croaked out. "It's the logical choice, Joshua," my mother said gently, like she was explaining basic math to a slow toddler. "Matthew has the education, the legal background. He sees the big picture. Running a business is about more than just stocking shelves and arguing with farmers." The insult was so profound it left me speechless. Matthew leaned forward, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. He reached over and patted my hand. "You did a good job, Josh. Really. You held down the fort, but it's time for a real professional to take over. Don't worry," he added, as if granting me a massive favor. "You can keep handling the day-to-day operations. You're great at the grunt work." I looked at my father, pleading silently. He just shrugged, looking away. "It's for the best, son. Matthew will elevate the family name." They hadn't just given him the credit. They had completely erased my contribution. I wasn't the architect of our success. I was just the hired help who kept the lights on until the real boss arrived. I thought losing the Vance job was my biggest sacrifice. I was wrong. The real exploitation hadn't even started yet. I think back to that moment, realizing that a funeral for my hopes of having a loving family would have been more appropriate than a celebration dinner. Another year slipped by in a haze of quiet, suffocating resentment. I ran the store, making Matthew look like a business genius while he collected the massive salary and took all the credit in his reports to our parents. Then came the announcement that sent a ripple of excitement through the family. Matthew was engaged. His fiancée, Lauren Vance, was a genuinely sweet, elegant woman from a prominent, wealthy family. Yes, that Vance family. Her father was Charles Vance, the CEO I had walked away from years ago. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Lauren was kind, but she was completely blind to Matthew's arrogant nature. She thought he was a hard-working entrepreneur. Of course, the wedding had to be the social event of the season. My parents saw it as their ultimate victory lap. And in a move of stunning, almost comical predictability, they turned to me to do the heavy lifting. "Joshua, darling," my mother cornered me in the dairy aisle one Tuesday morning. "You simply must plan the wedding. Matthew is far too busy with the firm and the store. You're the only one with the head for details and budgets. It would be such a tremendous help." A sane person would have laughed in her face and walked out. A sane person would have told her to hire a professional planner. But a small, stubborn, hopelessly desperate part of me saw this as a final chance. This wasn't a business. This was a family milestone. If I could execute this flawlessly, if I gave them the perfect day, maybe they would finally acknowledge me. I said yes. I approached the task like a corporate merger. I created massive spreadsheets. I researched venues, caterers, and florists with the tenacity of a detective. I sat down with Matthew and Lauren to look at their vision. The budget my parents magnanimously offered was $15,000. It was generous, but not nearly enough for the extravagant statement wedding Matthew had in his head. The initial quotes were coming in closer to $30,000. When I presented this reality to them, Matthew scoffed loudly. "Well, figure it out, Josh," he demanded, rolling his eyes. "Cut corners somewhere. You're the numbers guy." In a moment of utter self-destructive insanity, I made a fatal error. "I'll cover the difference," I heard myself say. "I have some savings. I'll put in $10,000. Consider it my wedding gift." Matthew's face lit up. He clapped my shoulder hard. "See? I knew you'd handle it, little brother. You always do." That $10,000 was my escape fund. It was the college fund I had repurposed to eventually move out of state and rebuild my life. And I was lighting it on fire for the brother who stole my career. I worked miracles. I found a breathtaking historic manor that had a last-minute cancellation. I negotiated a brilliant package deal with a caterer. I found a fantastic local band. I had it all locked down. A champagne wedding on a beer budget. When I presented the final plan, everyone was thrilled. For a brief 4 days there was peace. Then came Aunt Margaret. She came over for Sunday dinner, listened to my meticulous plans, and pursed her lips in that familiar, judgmental way. "A local band?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension as she sipped her wine. "Oh, Eleanor, no. That's a bit quaint. For a man of Matthew's professional standing, marrying into the Vance family, you need something more sophisticated. A string quartet. So much more class." I saw the flicker of greed in Matthew's eyes. "A string quartet does sound pretty amazing," he mused. "The band is already booked and the deposit is paid," I said, keeping my voice level, though my jaw tightened. "A string quartet of that caliber would cost at least $5,000. It's not in the budget." "Oh, Joshua, don't be such a stick in the mud," my mother chided instantly, waving her hand. "This is his wedding day. A little extra elegance is worth it. Just make it work." "Make It Work" became the soundtrack to my personal hell. After the string quartet came the flowers. Matthew suddenly decided the beautiful locally sourced arrangements were common and demanded white orchids flown in from Hawaii. "It's about prestige, Josh," he said, talking down to me like I was an idiot. "It's a look. It's also $3,000 for flowers that will be dead in a day," I countered, rubbing my temples. My father grumbled from behind his newspaper. "Don't ruin your brother's vision with your penny pinching. Just make it work." The demands snowballed into an avalanche of entitlement. He wanted a custom ice sculpture of their initials. He wanted a celebrity DJ to take over after the quartet. And then, the final kicker, he demanded we rent a vintage Rolls-Royce to deliver them to the reception. Every time I pointed out the lack of funds, I hit a wall of brutal indignation. "Why are you making this so difficult?" my mother would sigh, shaking her head. "It's like you want my wedding to be second-rate," Matthew accused, stepping into my personal space, his voice full of venom. "Are you really that jealous of my happiness?" They couldn't conceive that I was just trying to stick to the budget. In their minds, my fiscal responsibility was a manifestation of deep-seated jealousy. The $10,000 from my savings was entirely gone, vaporized on non-refundable deposits for things we didn't need. Now they expected me to fund this expanding fantasy out of my own pocket. I was exhausted. I was working 60 hours a week at the store and spending every spare second fighting with Matthew. The dream of a simple thank you was dead. My only goal was survival. I had tried to patch the cracks in their perfect facade, completely unaware that I was digging the grave for whatever was left of our family. The night before the wedding was supposed to be a calm family dinner at my parents' house. A chance to relax before the big day. The calm lasted exactly until the dessert plates were cleared. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and a gallon of black coffee. I'd spent the entire day on the phone, soothing a furious florist regarding the orchid delivery and arguing with a venue manager who was asking pointed questions about the growing list of unauthorized vendors. All I wanted was to eat, go home, and pass out. Matthew, however, was vibrating with a manic, arrogant energy. He tapped his fork against his water glass to get everyone's attention. A smug smile plastered across his face. "Okay, team," he began, treating us like his employees. "I've had a stroke of genius. A final touch to elevate the entire experience tomorrow. First, I think we need a lobster tail station for the late-night snack. Chicken is just so basic. Second, Dad, we need to order a few cases of that vintage champagne you love. The stuff we have is fine, but it's not great. And finally, and this is the big one, a buddy of mine knows a guy who shoots photography for pro athletes. He's available tomorrow. We have to have him. Imagine the pictures." I stared at him. My mind struggled to process the sheer, breathtaking audacity of his words. It wasn't just one demand. It was a triple-decker sandwich of financial insanity, 12 hours before the event. I placed my fork down very carefully on the table. "Matthew," I said. My voice dropped to a dangerous, quiet rumble. "No." He blinked, genuinely shocked by my flat refusal. "What do you mean, no?" "I'm not asking, Josh. I'm telling you. It's my wedding. The caterer's final numbers were due last week," I explained, ticking the points off my fingers, trying to keep my breathing steady. "The alcohol is delivered. We have an excellent photographer already contracted. There is no more money. The budget, the one I paid for out of my own pocket, is gone. It is over. We cannot add a single thing." Matthew's face contorted into an ugly, familiar sneer. "The one you paid for? Oh, please don't act like some great martyr. 10 grand is a rounding error on my future salary. You're being pathetic and cheap just like always. You've been trying to sabotage this wedding from the beginning because you can't stand to see me happy." The accusation hung in the heavy air of the dining room. It was ludicrous. It was cruel. I looked around the table, desperately waiting for just one person to step in. Just one person to say, "That's enough, Matthew." My father suddenly found the floral pattern on his dinner plate intensely fascinating. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Aunt Margaret nodded slowly in agreement with Matthew, sipping her tea. And my mother looked at me. Her face wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was glacially cold. She set her wine glass down with a soft, sharp click. "Joshua," she said, her voice chilling the room to freezing, "your brother has a point. You have been needlessly difficult through this whole process. Honestly, at this point, the greatest gift you could give your brother for his wedding is you vanishing from this family. Forever." The world stopped spinning. The cheerful ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to grow deafeningly loud, marking the seconds of my own execution. It wasn't a threat hurled in the heat of an argument. It was a calculated statement of my net worth to them. 0. It was my severance package for 28 years of servitude. Something inside me, the part that had spent a lifetime absorbing blows, swallowing insults, and begging for scraps of affection, didn't just break. It turned to dust and blew away. And in its place was a vast, terrifying emptiness. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't shed a single tear. I slowly pushed my chair back from the table. The wood scraped loudly against the floor. I stood up. I looked at each of them. Matthew's triumphant smirk. My father's pathetic cowardice. My mother's icy dismissal. I didn't say a word. I turned my back on them, walked out of the dining room, down the hall, and out the front door into the cool night air. The heavy click of that front door closing behind me was the last sound I ever wanted to hear from that house. It was a final, irrevocable full stop. I got into my car and just drove. I drove past the park where I'd scraped my knee as a kid, past the movie theater, past Ellis Groceries, the monument to my biggest mistake. Vanishing forever. The words settled heavy and cold in the pit of my stomach. For the first hour, I was a numb, hollowed-out shell. Then the numbness receded, and the pain flooded in. It tore at me like a limb being amputated without anesthesia. I pulled over on the gravel shoulder of a dark, deserted country road. I pounded my fists violently against the steering wheel and let out a raw, guttural scream of pure anguish that tore my throat. I wept for the boy who just wanted his parents to be proud of him, and for the man who finally realized they never would be. When the storm passed, it left behind a strange, cold clarity. The pain burned clean into absolute rage. They didn't see me as a son. I was a tool that had just been told it was no longer needed. They wanted me to vanish? Okay, I would vanish, but I wouldn't go quietly. If a tool is removed from a machine, the machine stops working. I built their perfect wedding. What would happen if I just took myself away? A slow, humorless smile touched my lips. I would give them exactly what they asked for. An absence so profound it would swallow their perfect day whole. I grabbed my phone and called my best friend, David. He picked up on the first ring. "Josh, man, it's late. Everything okay for tomorrow?" I took a deep breath of the cold night air. "You know how you've been telling me for 10 years that I'm a doormat?" I said, my voice eerily calm. Yeah. Well, I smiled grimly into the darkness. The doormat is about to get up and walk away, and it's going to take the whole damn front porch with it. They wanted me gone. But if you rip the steel framing out of a building, you better be prepared for the collapse. I found a cheap, anonymous motel off the interstate. I didn't sleep a wink. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, drinking bitter black coffee from a styrofoam cup, and I planned. There was no blind rage anymore, just methodical, surgical precision. I opened my laptop, pulled up the master folder labeled Matthew's Wedding, and arranged all the contracts and invoices. I was dismantling a bomb I had built myself, and I knew exactly which wires to cut and in what order. At 7:59 a.m., the morning of the wedding, I took a final sip of coffee. Showtime. My first call was to Deborah, the head events manager at the manor. She answered brightly. "Erie Grand Manor, Deborah speaking." "Josh, the man of the hour." "Deborah, good morning," I said, my voice completely level. "There's been a significant change of plan. I'm calling to inform you that the Ellis Vance wedding scheduled for today has been canceled." The silence on the line was absolute. I could hear her breathing. "I'm sorry," she finally squeaked. "Canceled? Josh, it's 8 in the morning. The wedding is in 6 hours. My staff is already setting up tables." "I understand the inconvenience, Deborah. It is an unforeseen family emergency. As per Section 7B of the contract, I am authorizing the forfeit of the full deposit. Please consider this my formal and final notification." "But the bride? The groom? Shouldn't I speak with your parents?" she stammered, clearly panicking. "No," I cut her off firmly. "You will not. The contract is strictly in my name. The deposit was paid from my personal bank account. The decision is mine alone. The event is canceled. Thank you for your time." I hung up before she could argue. My heart pounded with a surge of pure, unadulterated control. I called Sal, the head caterer. I gave him the same speech. He whistled loudly into the receiver. "Wow, kid, that's cold. But hey, you paid the deposit, it's your call. More roast prime rib for my staff tonight, I guess." I called the florist, canceling the absurd Hawaiian orchids. I went down the list. The string quartet, the photographer, the vintage Rolls-Royce rental, the bakery making the 5-tier cake. With each call, I severed ties not just to an event, but to a lifetime of servitude. By 9:45 a.m., an entire wedding, meticulously constructed over 6 grueling months, was vaporized. I logged into my banking app. The non-refundable deposits were a painful $3,000 loss. But the final balances due upon delivery that day, nearly $7,000 of my hard-earned money, were safe. I grabbed a cheap burner phone I'd bought at a gas station, sent one text to my own regular number, "Wish granted." Then I snapped the burner in half, threw it in the trash, packed my bag, and drove south. The explosion at Ground Zero happened at precisely 11:02 a.m. My mother, Eleanor, swept into the grand ballroom of the manor, fully dressed in her extravagant mother-of-the-groom gown, expecting a flurry of caterers and florists bowing to her. She was met with a hollow, echoing cavern. Tables stacked against the wall, chairs piled high, the floor completely bare. Not a single orchid in sight. She marched into Deborah's office, her heels clicking furiously on the hardwood. "Deborah, what on earth is going on? Where is everyone?" Deborah looked up from her desk, her eyes wide with a mix of pity and fear. "Mrs. Ellis, I received a call this morning from your son, Joshua. He canceled the entire event. He cited the contract. When my father and Matthew arrived at noon, they found my mother pacing frantically in an empty room, in a full-blown hyperventilating panic." "What's going on?" Matthew demanded, his arrogant smile vanishing instantly. "It's Josh," my father said numbly, holding his phone. He'd just spoken to Sal the caterer. "He did this. He called every single vendor and canceled. Kept the deposits. The wedding is off." Matthew let out a primal, echoing roar of rage. "That insignificant little worm. How dare he? I'll ruin him. I'll sue him for everything he has. He doesn't have a job to lose, and you're the lawyer, not him." My father reminded him helplessly. By 2 p.m., guests began arriving to a scene of utter humiliation. Instead of classical music and champagne, the town's elite were met with Matthew screaming red-faced at venue staff, my mother weeping dramatically in a corner, and the bride, Lauren, standing by a window like a statue of frozen horror, her perfect makeup ruined by silent tears. Matthew tried to bully Deborah into ordering pizzas and setting up chairs. Deborah, her patience exhausted, snapped back. "Sir, the contract was with your brother. He canceled it. You have no event booked here. Frankly, you and your guests are trespassing. Leave." Into this vortex of spectacular social disaster glided a sleek, black limousine. The chauffeur opened the door. Charles Vance stepped out, impeccably tailored, radiating power. The multi-million-dollar CEO took in the bewildering scene in a single sweeping glance. "Lauren," Charles Vance's voice cut through the noise like a shard of ice. "Explain to me what in the hell is going on." Lauren collapsed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Matthew, seeing a powerful ally, immediately rushed over, shifting into his victim persona. "Mr. Vance, thank God you're here. This is my brother's doing. He's deeply unstable, sir. Consumed by jealousy. He did this to sabotage me and embarrass our family." My father chimed in. "It's true, Charles. The boy has always been difficult. We'll handle him." Charles Vance held his daughter gently, his unblinking gaze fixed on my parents. He let the silence stretch. "What was the fight about?" he asked softly. Lauren took a shaky breath. "It was about money. Matthew wanted more expensive things. Josh said he couldn't afford it, that he'd already spent $10,000 of his own money. Then, his mother told him the greatest gift he could give Matthew was to vanish from the family forever." The ugly words sucked the air out of the room. Charles Vance's expression hardened into pure disgust. He looked at Matthew, then at my parents. A look of dawning recognition crossed his face. "Joshua," he said slowly, testing the name. "Joshua Ellis. I know that name." He turned his full, terrifying attention to my father. "Robert, do you have any idea who your other son really is?" My father looked bewildered. He helps out at our grocery store." Charles let out a sharp bark of contemptuous laughter. "No. Your son Joshua is the marketing prodigy who nearly landed a major regional contract with my company years ago. I interviewed him myself. He withdrew at the last minute because of a family emergency. I see now what that emergency was. He came home to save your asses." He stepped forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "You had a racehorse in your stable, and you treated it like a plow mule. You were so blinded by the cheap shine of this one," he gestured dismissively at Matthew, "that you couldn't see the pure gold standing right next to you." Charles Vance delivered the final execution. "I am going to find your son, and when I do, I'm going to offer him a senior role in my company with a salary that will make his brother look like a joke. I'll give him the career and respect you were too ignorant to provide." He looked at Matthew with chilling finality. "Congratulations, son. You got your wish. Your brother has vanished. And in doing so, he exposed you all for the pathetic fools you truly are." The fallout from Charles Vance's verbal detonation was absolute. He didn't wait for apologies or excuses. He wrapped a protective arm around Lauren and guided her toward the exit. As they passed a bare wooden table, Lauren paused. With a quiet, deliberate movement, she twisted the massive diamond engagement ring off her finger and left it on the polished wood. It glittered under the chandeliers, a lonely monument to a divorce that happened before the marriage even began. The departure of the Vances pulled the plug on the entire charade. The remaining guests, armed with the juiciest gossip of the decade, fled the manor as if escaping a burning building. Left alone in the echoing hall, my mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing loudly. My father looked shrunken, the color of ash. Matthew, entirely humiliated, shrieked, kicked a decorative urn to pieces, and swore he would destroy me. Later that night, fueled by whiskey and delusion, Matthew made his final, fatal mistake. He logged onto the town's community web forum, a place usually for bake sales, and unleashed a massive post, playing the victim. He painted me as a mentally ill monster who destroyed his wedding out of bitter jealousy. For about an hour, he got sympathy. Then, the bridesmaids and the guests logged on. One bridesmaid posted a detailed account of the dinner fight, quoting my mother's vanishing comment verbatim. Another guest commented, "I was there. I heard what CEO Vance said. Josh saved their business and they treated him like dirt." The floodgates opened. Former grocery store employees, neighbors, and classmates poured in, sharing stories of my grueling hours and Matthew's arrogant entitlement. Matthew hadn't just started a fire. He had thrown gasoline on his own reputation. The Ellis family name became radioactive overnight. Hundreds of miles south, in a nondescript motel room in North Carolina, I was blissfully unaware of the digital firestorm. I had spent the day driving, the highway humming a lullaby to my frayed nerves. I felt a clean exhaustion, the weight of my old life miles behind me in the rearview mirror. I finally turned on my phone. Notifications exploded. I bypassed the dozens of angry texts from my family and saw a message from David. "Holy crap, dude. Check the town forum. You're a folk hero. Call me." I pulled up the website and watched my family's public execution in real time. My private pain was public knowledge, and for the first time in my life, people were taking my side. Then, I saw a voicemail from an unknown number. I pressed play. "Joshua, this is Charles Vance. David provided your number. I meant what I said today. I have a business proposal I would very much like to discuss with you. Call me." The voice radiated authority. It was the sound of a different world, a real promotion, a real future. As I stared at the screen, another call came in. Caller ID, Dad. A part of me needed to hear what he would say now that his world was ashes. I answered, "Joshua, thank God." His voice was thin, defeated. "Where are you? You've made your point, but this has gone too far. You need to come home now. We have to do damage control. You can release a statement, say you had a breakdown. We can fix this." The unmitigated gall left me breathless. His first instinct was still to use me to fix the mess he created. "Fix this." I let out a cold laugh. "There is no we. You made that clear last night. Don't be dramatic, Joshua. It's about the family name, the inheritance." He stammered, realizing how pathetic he sounded. "The family name is your problem now." My voice was hard as steel. "The inheritance is gone, isn't it? And so am I. You told me to vanish. I'm taking your advice. This is the last time you will ever speak to me." "Joshua, wait. Don't you dare." I pressed the red icon. I hung up. With a sense of quiet ceremony, I blocked his number. Then my mother's. Then Matthew's. Aunt Margaret's. The digital massacre was complete. The lines were cut. The The storm back home was tearing the Ellis name apart. But out here, looking out the motel window, my sky was just beginning to clear. The phone call with Charles Vance changed the entire trajectory of my life. He didn't just offer me a job. He threw me a lifeline when I was drowning in the wreckage of my own family. 2 days after I drove away from that catastrophic non-wedding, I was on a commercial flight to Charlotte, North Carolina, for an in-person meeting. I walked into the Vance Corporation headquarters, a gleaming, intimidating tower of glass and steel, feeling like an absolute imposter. My suit was off the rack, and my resume was heavily anchored by a bankrupt grocery store. But Charles Vance didn't treat me like a charity case. He treated me like a valued colleague. He remembered the exact details of the marketing proposal I had pitched him years ago. "You had an instinct for the heart of a business, Joshua," he told me, sitting across from me in his massive corner office that overlooked the sprawling city skyline. "It's a rare gift. I want that gift here." He made me an offer that made my head spin. He wanted me as the senior marketing strategist for the entire Southeast region. The salary attached to the offer was staggering. It was more than my father had made in his absolute best year running the grocery store. It came with full corporate benefits, a generous relocation package, and most importantly, a chance to start completely over. I accepted on the spot. Asheville, where the regional office was located, became my new home. It was a city alive with a creative, vibrant energy that felt a million miles away from the stagnant, judgmental fishbowl of my hometown in Erie. The mountains that surrounded the city became my sanctuary. For the first time in my entire life, I felt like I could actually breathe the air without apologizing for taking up space. Work became my salvation. I poured all the manic energy I had once spent managing my family's endless drama into my new career. I was surrounded by smart, ambitious people who challenged my ideas and respected my input. I wasn't Matthew's little brother anymore. I wasn't the family janitor. I was Joshua, the guy who had a knack for turning struggling regional campaigns into massive corporate successes. Charles became a genuine mentor. He took me under his wing, teaching me the aggressive nuances of corporate strategy, and more importantly, he taught me how to value my own contributions. The massive promotion he had promised in that chaotic wedding hall became a reality after my first year when he officially made me a regional director. I started building a real life outside of the office walls. I leased a small, sunlit apartment with a balcony where I could drink my morning coffee and watch the heavy fog roll over the Blue Ridge Mountains. I found a local coffee shop right down the street where the owner, a sharp, incredibly funny woman named Sarah, became my first real friend in the city. We would talk for hours about everything and nothing. She knew I had a painful past, but she never pried. She just created a safe space for me to be myself without any expectations. My oldest friend, David, remained my only real connection to my former life. We talked on the phone every few weeks, and he would give me periodic updates on the blast radius I had left behind. The news from Erie was a relentless, depressing drumbeat of decline. Ellis Groceries had officially gone into Chapter 11 bankruptcy within 6 months of my departure. The public humiliation from the wedding disaster, combined with the explosive town forum thread, had been the final nail in the coffin. No one in town wanted to shop at a store run by people who treated their own blood like garbage. My parents lost absolutely everything. The family business, my father's precious legacy, was liquidated. They had to sell their big, beautiful house, the one my mother had been so fiercely proud of, just to settle their mounting debts. They moved into a cramped, depressing apartment complex on the bad side of town. Matthew's life had imploded even more spectacularly. Lauren's quiet divorce from our family before the wedding even started was just the beginning. After she broke the engagement and walked away, Matthew's prestigious law firm, deeply embarrassed by the viral local scandal and his unhinged online behavior, had quietly let him go. He was a lawyer without a practice. No other reputable firm in the tri-state area would touch him. If Matthew and Lauren had actually married, I can only imagine the bitter divorce and brutal custody battles over their assets, given his entitlement. But he didn't even get that far. The last David had heard, Matthew was working the cash register at a local hardware store. He was a bitter, angry shell of the golden boy he had once been. Hearing this news didn't bring me the wicked satisfaction I thought it might. There was no joy in their misery. There was just a profound, hollow sadness for the sheer waste of it all. They had destroyed their own lives and nearly destroyed mine in their blind worship of a false idol. But my sadness was distant now. It felt like watching a tragic movie about people I used to know a long time ago. My life was here in Asheville in the clean mountain air. I was building something new, something that was entirely my own, rising directly from the ashes of the life they had burned to the ground. Just as I began to feel truly settled, truly free, a piece of the past found its way to my new address. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope forwarded by David. I recognized my mother's familiar, elegant handwriting instantly. My hands actually trembled as I held it. A part of me wanted to throw it directly into the trash can, unopened. But the ghosts of childhood guilt and deeply ingrained obligation are incredibly hard to exorcise completely. I slid my thumb under the flap and opened it. The letter was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. It began with a flowery, tear-stained apology for the unfortunate words spoken that night, claiming she was just stressed about the wedding. Then it quickly pivoted to her current state. She wrote that she was terribly ill. A mysterious ailment, she called it, that the local doctors couldn't seem to diagnose. She claimed she was weak. She was fading. She spent most of her days confined to her bed. My father was totally lost, struggling to cope with her decline. Matthew was a broken man consumed by severe clinical depression. Then came the hook, her final wish. She hinted heavily at her own impending funeral. She wrote that the only thing that could bring her peace in her final days on earth was to see me, to look into my eyes and tell me how sorry she was, to heal the massive rift in our shattered family before it was entirely too late. It was perfectly crafted to prey on my oldest, deepest insecurities. My lifelong, conditioned role as the family caretaker. It sent a sharp spear of guilt straight into my chest. What if it was true? What if she was really dying in that cramped apartment? Could I live with myself if I let my own mother die alone, believing her youngest son hated her? The 10 grand I lost was supposed to be my college fund replacement. Sure, but this was a human life. The old programming kicked in hard. The urge to fix, to soothe, to take away their pain was a powerful, dangerous current, threatening to pull me right back under the water. I was so deeply conflicted that I took the physical letter to Sarah's coffee shop. I needed a completely objective, outside perspective. I handed it to her over the counter. She wiped her hands on her apron, leaned against the espresso machine, and read it silently. Her expression was completely unreadable. When she finished, she folded the thick paper carefully and handed it right back to me. "Joshua," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I'm not going to tell you what to do with your family, but as an objective observer, this letter has more red flags than a communist parade." I stared at her. "You think she's lying? Mysterious ailment? Fading away?" Sarah scoffed lightly. "Healthy, well-adjusted people don't talk like a Victorian romance novel when they are sick. Desperate manipulators do. She's not asking for your forgiveness, Josh. She's issuing a summons. She wants her audience back." Her words were like a splash of ice water. They helped clear some of the dense emotional fog in my head. Later that same afternoon, I mentioned the situation to Charles during one of our weekly strategy check-ins. He listened intently, his hands steepled in front of his face. Then he leaned back in his heavy leather chair. "Let me tell you a story, Joshua," Charles said smoothly. "Early in my career, I had a junior business partner who screwed me over on a major real estate deal. A year later, he came crawling back, full of tears and apologies, claiming his new company was on the absolute verge of collapse. He said he needed my help to save it so his kids wouldn't go hungry. I almost fell for it. I almost opened my checkbook. Then I did my due diligence. I had a buddy look into his firm. It turned out his company was perfectly fine. He just wanted my specific industry expertise to land a massive government contract he couldn't get on his own. Charles looked me straight in the eye, his gaze piercing. People show you exactly who they are, Joshua. It is our job to believe them the very first time. Your mother showed you who she was the night she told you to vanish. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that completely obliterated any lingering shadow of doubt or guilt, arrived in my email inbox late that very night. It was an email from Lauren Vance. We had exchanged a few polite, brief messages over the past 2 years, mostly holiday greetings, but this one was entirely different. The subject line was simply, "You need to see this." "Hi Joshua," she wrote. "I hope you're doing incredibly well in Asheville. I heard through a mutual family acquaintance back in Erie that your mother might be reaching out to you. I feel like you deserve to know the absolute truth before you make any decisions. I had lunch with my aunt last week, who happens to be in the same local book club as your mother. According to her, your mother is in perfect, radiant health. She's not sick at all. But she is absolutely miserable because she's been completely ostracized from her elite social circle. She's desperate to create a public story of a grand family reconciliation to try and salvage her ruined reputation." I read the paragraph twice, my jaw tightening. Sarah was right. It was a complete fabrication. But the email didn't stop there. Also, Lauren continued, "My father's corporate lawyer came across something during the initial financial fallout and background checks after the wedding was canceled. He thought you should have it. He said it might be useful if there were ever any lingering legal or financial ties regarding your family business, or any future inheritance disputes." I'm so sorry, Josh. Attached to the bottom of the email was a massive PDF file. I clicked it open. It was a collection of detailed bank statements and accounting ledgers from the Ellis Groceries business account, dating back 5 full years. I scrolled through the pages, my eyes scanning the highlighted rows. They clearly showed a distinct, undeniable pattern of systematic embezzlement. Dozens of large, round-number cash withdrawals, unauthorized wire transfers to private accounts, and massive credit card payoffs. All of them signed and authorized by Matthew Ellis. He had been siphoning thousands upon thousands of dollars from the grocery store for years to fund his expensive suits, his lavish vacations, and his pathetic illusion of being a wealthy, successful lawyer. The financial crisis that had nearly destroyed my family, the bankruptcy that forced me to turn down my dream job at Vance Corporation the first time around, it wasn't just a result of my father's poor management or bad luck with suppliers. It was felony theft. Matthew had bled the store dry, and my parents had known. Looking at the dates of the transfers, they aligned perfectly with the timeline of when the store almost went under. They knew Matthew stole the money. They covered for him to protect his precious legal career. And then they called me home, playing the desperate victims, so I could unknowingly clean up the financial evidence, work myself to the bone, and bail out their golden boy criminal. I sat alone in my living room, staring at the bright computer screen, looking at the black and white proof of their ultimate betrayal. It was so much worse, so much more sinister than I had ever imagined. The letter sitting on my coffee table wasn't a plea for a dying mother's forgiveness. It was an accessory to a crime. They didn't miss their son. They missed their shield. They missed their human ATM. I stood up, walked over to the coffee table, and picked up the thick cream envelope. I walked into my home office, turned on my heavy-duty paper shredder, and fed the letter directly into the slot. I stood there and listened to the whining metal blades violently tear my mother's lies into 1,000 meaningless, irrecoverable pieces. The last ghost of my past had finally been laid to rest. It has been exactly 2 years now since that fateful morning at the motel. My life in Asheville feels like the only real life I have ever lived. The desperate, exhausted man who drove away from Erie in a blinding haze of pain and rage feels like a fictional character in a tragic book I read a very long time ago. I am truly happy. It's a quiet, steady, unshakable kind of happiness. It's not the frantic, fleeting joy I used to chase whenever I managed to briefly please my parents. It's the deep, resonant peace that comes from building a life on a solid foundation of self-respect, instead of the sinking quicksand of seeking other people's approval. My work at Vance Corporation continues to be incredibly challenging and rewarding. Charles Vance has become much more than a boss. He's a mentor and a true friend who believed in my potential when my own blood treated me like dirt. My friendships with Sarah and David are the strong cornerstones of my daily life. We've formed our own little chosen family, one built on mutual respect, actual laughter, and showing up for each other with absolutely no questions asked. We spend the holidays together. We go on weekend hiking trips up the trails, and we navigate the normal ups and downs of life as a united team. I still hear whispers about my old family from time to time through the hometown grapevine, but the stories are always just sad and pathetic. My parents live like hermits in their tiny apartment, prisoners of the massive public shame they brought completely upon themselves. Matthew finally lost his retail job at the hardware store and moved out of state entirely, hoping to outrun his radioactive reputation. They are all living out their days in the smoldering wreckage of a world they proudly burned down with their own hands. I feel a very distant, cold pity for them, but absolutely nothing more. They are no longer my burden to carry. I learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of my entire life. You cannot force toxic people to value you, no matter how much you sacrifice or how hard you work. You can only choose to value yourself. Walking away from that wedding wasn't an act of petty revenge. It was an act of raw survival. Vanishing from their lives was the only possible way I could finally become visible to myself. Just this morning, I was standing on the rocky summit of a mountain trail in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The cool, clean, high-altitude air was filling my lungs. The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon, painting the whole world in brilliant, breathtaking shades of orange, pink, and gold. It was perfectly beautiful, and it was entirely peaceful. I pulled out my phone from my jacket pocket to snap a quick photo of the sunrise. As the screen lit up, I saw a new notification sitting on my lock screen. It was a friend request on social media. The name on the screen was Eleanor Ellis. My mother. 2 years ago, seeing that name pop up on my phone would have sent my heart into a frantic, panicked rhythm. It would have immediately opened the heavy floodgates of childhood guilt, lingering anger, and endless emotional turmoil. But this morning, standing on top of the world, bathed in the morning light, I just looked at the screen. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no guilt. I saw the notification for exactly what it was. It was just a ghost knocking on a door that was no longer there. It was a final, desperate, pathetic attempt to pull me back into a miserable story that had already ended a long time ago. With a calm, perfectly steady finger, I pressed the decline button. Then, I went to her profile and hit block. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, took a deep, refreshing breath of the crisp mountain air, and watched the rest of the sunrise. The sky was vast, bright, and open, and for the very first time in my life, the horizon was all mine. That brings us to the end of my journey, and I want to sincerely thank you for staying with me through all of it. Looking back at everything that happened, the biggest lesson I learned is about the reality of toxic environments and the sunk cost fallacy of family. Society conditions us to believe that blood is thicker than water, that we owe our families our endless loyalty, even when they treat us like a disposable resource. We drain our bank accounts, our emotional reserves, and our very sanity trying to fix people who do not want to be fixed, only to realize we are destroying ourselves in the process. The truth is, setting an absolute boundary is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of self-preservation. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that made you sick. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to pack your bags, walk out the door, and let the people who take you for granted face the consequences of their own actions. You are not required to set yourself on fire just to keep other people warm. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to make a brutally difficult choice to cut ties with someone in order to protect your own peace and mental health? How did you find the courage to finally walk away? I would be incredibly honored to read your story and your perspective in the comments down below. Let's support each other. Or, if this story simply resonated with you and you agree with the lesson here, just leave the word "good" in the comments so I know this message reached you. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Your support truly means the absolute world to me. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.